All right, so I'm going to walk through real quick how to get these files uploaded into Reaper. I mentioned early on in the semester that I would probably be using Reaper with us mostly because it's free to download. You can download it on your own computer at home. You can access it in the labs. It's pretty straightforward to use, very user friendly. So if you're familiar with another program, feel free to use that by all means, whatever you're comfortable with. But if you're not at all familiar with any digital audio workstation, I'm going to show you how to get these tracks in a Reaper, and you can do this on your own laptop, desktop, or again, we have it in the computer lab. So you should all have received a OneDrive link. When you open that OneDrive link, and I'm just going to go to OneDrive in my Outlook account, and you're going to get this link for Music 2071 recordings. And you'll see I've got acoustic guitar close mics. If you were there in class with us today, the close mics is where we had the two close mics much closer to the guitar, or one kind of near the sound hole and one near the neck, where the neck and the body meet. The wide mics is the second part of the recording where we just widen them out. So one mic was much more at the end of the body, and one mic was much more closer to the headstock of the guitar. So that's the differentiation between those two. From last Friday, we have the sax recording that we did with Dr. Fagley. The first one was we had a combo of the SM58, the TLM170, and Andrew's lav mic that was clipped onto the bell. And then we had the two ribbon mics. And you'll notice when you open the ribbon mics, that session, that the ribbon mics are going to be out of phase. And I'll talk about phase. We've talked about it a little bit, but I'll explain how to switch the phase in this video. And more on what that means. The drum session from when we recorded drums, and the piano session from down in the basement when Ethan played piano for us. So I'm just going to choose the drum session. I'm going to select all the files. In fact, I'm going to go back to the recording here. I'm just going to click this drum session folder, and I'm going to download this whole folder. And I'm just going to hide Safari. So this is downloading. Should just take a couple seconds. It's not much audio. These files are all 44.1K sample rate and 16-bit bit depth. So when we get to that point in Reaper, we'll just double check that. The only thing that could possibly mess you up as far as that, like if you made a session that was a different sample rate, you'll hear some clicks and pops. We haven't really talked much about sampling, but that is the kind of common issue when your sample rates are mismatched. So I'm just going to open this up, just confirm that all our files are here. These are all the drum tracks. And so now I'm going to open Reaper. Interesting. Again, I'm going to save this as drums to the desktop. Yeah, we'll just do that for now. Okay, project sample rate. So here we go. I'm going to change this to 44.1 because these audio files are at 44.1, and I know that for sure because I exported them. I'm going to hit OK. It's going to prompt me to just continue with this trial, still evaluating, because this is again, it's a free download. You can pay for it if you want, but it never really forces you to. So in order to import these tracks, we can literally just drag and drop them into this new Reaper session. And so I'm going to open my drum session folder. I'm just going to select all these tracks. And I'm just going to drag and drop these into my session. Now it prompts me, you're inserting multiple media items on separate tracks, or do you want them on one single track like back to back to back. I want them all on separate tracks, obviously, but Reaper gives you that option. So here we are. It made all of our new tracks. If you want to expand this is your mix view down here and your edit view up here. I'm going to expand this up a little so that I can see these two sections. Here is where we would put inserts and sends, or plugins, as they're often called, especially in Pro Tools. And I'm just going to reorder them a little bit for my own personal preference. It's kind of standard way of ordering your drums would be kick, snare, toms, overheads, etc. So I'm going to do that, and I'm just going to literally drag and put my kick in, then my kick out, snare top, snare bottom, hi-hat, then we'll go toms, tom 1, tom 2, the overhead left and right, and then the house left and right. Those are the mics that just kind of permanently live in the recital hall. And let's see, to zoom in and out, if you have a scroll wheel on your mouse or your trackball, you can just scroll and it'll zoom in and out horizontally. For the vertical zoom, I think it's command, and then shift up and down. I am working on a Mac, so if you have a PC or if you're going to be doing this on a PC, I don't know what the keys might be necessarily. But here's all our drum tracks, and here's our mix window here. And really what I want you to do with this assignment is just mix the drums. You can solo and listen to one track at a time. You can solo multiple tracks, right? So you can hear the difference. I want you to hear the difference, really, between the kick in and the kick out, because there is going to be a difference. The kick in, which is literally inside the sound hole in the front of the head, the front of the drum head, that's going to get a little more snap from the kick. And then this outer mic is going to get a little more of the low end, the air that's actually coming through the sound hole. Similar with the snare top and bottom. And again, we talked about this. The top's going to get you that snap from the snare drum being hit. The snare bottom is what's really going to get the actual snare sound. And again, just kind of experiment with getting a blend of those two. Hear the difference between the top and the bottom. And I mentioned phase, so you will notice. Be able to hear. And I don't. So what I want you to hear is solo both the snare top and bottom, and just listen to the snare, and then put on any old EQ track. Let's see, EQ. Choose an EQ, and let's see. Let's go Q1 mono. Here we go. Okay. So this, even though it doesn't look like a button, that circle with the diagonal line through it, that's kind of the universal symbol for phase reversal. So we want to reverse the phase. These two signals, the snare top and snare bottom, are what's called out of phase. So if you can imagine, even though this is obviously an EQ display, but if you can imagine your signal maybe starting here at number 1 and your signal is going positive, negative, and then back to 0. Well, on the snare bottom mic, the sound actually hits that mic at a later time. So that signal starts further in time and is doing that same shape. So what happens is you have two waveforms that are starting in different places, and some of that signal is actually canceling out. So when one signal is positive up here, the other signal is in the negative, et cetera, et cetera. And so you hear that signal loss. You hear it really thin. So when you solo both of these in play, you're going to hear, you'll hear the snare, but it's going to sound a little thin and weak. And when you flip the phase, that it'll change. It'll sound a lot more full. Now, if you just listen to one at a time, you won't notice it because the phase is only important when it's relative to another signal. So it's when you're soloing them that you'll hear the difference when you flip that phase. It's also worth doing to check the phase on the overheads. So you could just put that same EQ, Q1. Again, there's our phase button. So you can do the same thing. You can solo the overheads, take a listen, flip the phase, take a listen, and see, is it better or is it worse? Does it sound thinner or does it sound more full? And that's going to tell you whether it's in or out of phase. If you can't identify it just by, right off the bat, when you change the phase, when you flip the phase, if it sounds better, then they were out of phase and you want to go ahead and flip it. The house mics, it shouldn't be necessary because they are, they're so close to being in the same spot and they're so much more distant, right? They're room mics. So that is just by nature going to be a much less of an issue because of all the reflections coming from around the room hitting those mics at different times anyway. So the phase will be really not an issue for something like room mics, or typically is not. But definitely check the snare, check the overheads. You can even check the kick if you want. I don't think that should be much of a problem as well, but it's got the potential to be, right? Because the mics are in different places. We're miking the same source from two different locations. And so it might be worth checking it on the kick as well. And so again, just get a kind of decent mix of the kick drum. And what I want you to do when you're done is take a screenshot of your Reaper session. I want to just kind of see where your levels are at. And you don't have to use all of these tracks. If we talked about this when we were recording the drums, the overheads are going to pick up the hi-hat and they're going to pick up the snare. The overheads are picking up the whole kit, right? They're picking up the whole drum kit. If you feel like the overheads are giving you enough hi-hat, you don't have to use it. If the overheads are picking up plenty of snare, I don't know that I would remove the snare tracks altogether, but you might not need to use much, right? Same with the toms. You might find that the mics on the toms themselves don't need to be very present in the mix because you're hearing plenty of them in the overheads. The rooms, these are just for that reverb room sound. So you can choose to leave them in. You could choose to take them out. I would probably in most situations leave them in, but probably tucked a little bit, tucked down in the mix. And so if you just hold Command and click on, any number of tracks really, but if you select both of these tracks, then you've kind of grouped them together essentially. So you can move both of those faders together. In Pro Tools, we're able to kind of turn that function on and off. We don't have to necessarily select the tracks every time, but you could do it with any number of tracks. If you wanted to bring the house mics down and the kick mics down, as long as you're holding Command, whatever track you select, it's going to basically group them all together. Let's see. Double clicking on any fader will set it back to what's called unity, or at 0 dB essentially. In Reaper, it looks like their unity is just kind of some default position. It's not necessarily 0 dB. In fact, their meter, these are all negative values. let's see. Okay, so if you can see here, this is the value in decibels of where your fader is set, right? And so yeah, when you double click at Unity, it is at 0 dB. So these negative values here, to be honest, I'm not entirely sure what those are representative of. Could be for metering purposes and not your actual fader value, but that's not super important right now. Another thing to be mindful of is once you start pushing these faders up and you get a balance of kick, snare, hat, toms, overheads, etc., it's probably going to sound a little muddy. And one thing that you can do to instantly just spread out and clear up your mix is take these overheads, take the rooms, and pan them. So right now, everything defaults to being panned right up the middle, which means you have the same amount of signal coming out your left speaker as you do the right speaker. Well, the whole point of miking something in stereo is to take advantage of that stereo space. So I'm going to pan the overheads hard left and hard right. And I definitely encourage you to listen to the difference. If you double click again on the pan, it'll just set it back to Unity, back to the center. So listen to it before and then listen to it after and just pan these hard left and right. And you'll hear it immediately just open right up. And it sounds like a, you have now a stereo image, which again is the point of miking something in stereo. Now, if you notice, I still have all 4 of these tracks selected, the kicks and the house mics. So when I'm moving the pan, these are technically grouped, so it's moving all of them. I don't want that. So I'm going to double click to set them to Unity because I want my kick right up the middle. And now I'm just going to click on one of these just to deselect all those tracks, and then click and command click to select these. Actually, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do these one at a time because I want to control those pans individually. Sorry. So yeah, same thing with the rooms. I'm going to pan them hard left and right. In fact, I might pan the toms, right? Tom 1 was our floor tom, and our pans and our left-right perspective is as if we're looking at the drummer. So if I'm looking at the drummer and I know tom 1 is the floor tom, well, that's a little bit to my left, which would be the drummer's right. So I might pan that a little bit to the left. Tom 2 is the rack tom, and that was a little bit to my right, so I might pan that a little too. Same with the hi-hat. It was off to my right, or the drummer's left. And just, experiment with that. And it's not an exact science. These, amounts that I pan these, it's pretty arbitrary. You don't even necessarily have to. It just play with that stereo space because, we have it. That's why we listen on 2 speakers. Obviously headphones is a different matter, but when you've got a stereo speaker setup, you want to take advantage of that stereo space. And by panning things all up the middle, you're just confining all of your signal to sounding like it's right in the middle. And you want to give things kind of their own space. And for stereo recording, like the overheads, you want, in my opinion, you want to open those up, and it just really it gives your mix another dimension to it. And that dimension is that left-right sonic space. So anyway, just play around with those, and again, take a screenshot so I can see what you did, what tracks you used, what you didn't use. And then when we're done, we're gonna just select the whole piece of audio in the timeline, and then we are going to where is it? Render. Sorry, we're gonna render it. So it's going to bring up this dialog. And what rendering is it's going to take your mix and bounce it down to a stereo track. One stereo track that you could, play on your phone, play on your laptop, play in your car stereo. Right? So the source is going to be the master mix. We're going to use or render the entire project. You can call it whatever you want to call it. This is where you're going to save it to. So if you want to change that, that's fine. Here it's going to save it to my drums folder that I made this session in. I'm going to keep the sample rate at 44.1. We're going to leave it as a stereo track. Most of the rest of this we don't really need to worry about, although I am going to change the bit depth to 16-bit. And that's just because that's standard for most playback devices is 44.1 16-bit. And then I'm going to save my settings, and I'm going to render one file. Cool. And now if I choose Show in Finder, boom, drums.wave. That's my stereo mix of my drums. And so when you're all done with that, what I want you to do is attach your rendered file, whatever you end up calling it, and your screenshot, and send that to me in an email. And that'll be basically our first graded assignment. So if you have any questions, as always, you can call me, text me, email me. You can find me around campus. You can ask me in class on Wednesday. Today's Monday, so let's just call this due by the end of next Monday. And if you have any questions between now and then, just let me know. All right, good luck, everyone.